Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Books I Should Have Read a Long Time Ago, desultorily chosen based on how I felt at the time, but really, I probably should have read these sooner. So this is going to be a 4-part sub-series. In this particular series, you will understand why in a moment when I flip over. This is a book that is something that I should have read because I'm a big fantasy reader, and one should probably read at least some of the books that are foundational to your, type of reading that you do, if only to understand where things came from. So what is this series? Well, some of you may have already guessed, but let's move on to discussing Tolkien's The Hobbit. Now, I didn't read this sooner for a wholly idiosyncratic reason. The first time I tried to read The Hobbit, I had an extremely weird nightmare that started off with being in a movie theater and watching the is anybody old enough to remember the cartoon Sun Tots and Smoggies? It was a cartoon aimed at small children, heavy environmental message. The Sun Tots were trying to, in effect, defend their pristine tropical island from the Smoggies who are running around and polluting it. Very Captain Planet-y. Anyways, I had this dream about the Sun Tots feeding a dragon great things, and then the dragon woke up, and then it came out of the movie screen, and then it chased everybody into the street and stuff. And I had that nightmare after reading, the first chapter, and didn't pick it up again for a while, and tried to read it again, and had exactly the same nightmare, and decided I was giving up on everything to do with Middle-earth. I felt it was a little bit too consistent. I know 2 times doesn't actually make consistency, but I decided I wasn't going to risk it. So, that was that. And for years, I just didn't bother reading it, but the fact is, I really, really should, and it appears that I have grown out of that particular nightmare, because I did not, in fact, have it. So, yay. Anyway, so I read The Hobbit. And yes, I will be getting on to the Lord of the Rings trilogy in due course. This is a book that I should have read many, many years ago and did not. I will say this about it. This is, by the way, the copy that we have on the shelf. This is my father's copy. Not that he's the world's biggest Tolkien fan, but there are some books that you keep anyways. This was, of course, published in the 1970s, but, initially published in the 30s. Anyways, I really, really like these prints. These are, these are prints. These don't have quite the look to me of being pen and ink drawings. They feel like prints, and they're really, really neat. I like these interior illustrations a lot. They're evocative and interesting, while at the same time you have that abstraction that's brought by printmaking that is different. And I really, really, really like these. I mean, look at this. You have this wonderfully evocative view of the mountain path, but at the same time, it's abstracted by the way in which you create shading and light and dark in prints. It has this abstract look to it, so that you look at it and at first it's not mountains and lightning and storm and so on. At first it's just line and shape, and then it resolves, and I really love that effect. It's really, there's some gorgeous interior illustrations. I mean, look at this. This looks much more like it would have been hand-drawn, but, pen and ink drawings have their own quality to them, their own starkness, simplicity, because this is not shaded. This isn't meant to be shaded. It's just flat, but the starkness of it really, really just gives it character. And I kind of love that. And now I'll talk about the actual text of the book, I guess. But, I have things, and those things have to do with illustrations. Anyways, the first thing that strikes me about this book, more than anything, is how inexorably English it is. And yes, of course, Tolkien was English, but there's a quality of a style of book that I haven't read much of at all, which is very much an English schoolboy's book. And throughout this, I keep on expecting somebody to shout, "Come on, Algie, we have to go before the headmaster gets here." It just has that feeling to it. The way the sentences are constructed, the way everybody talks, it is extremely English schoolboy. And I'm not sure how much I like it or don't. It is part of the charm. And this was aimed at a younger audience, this particular book. So, being aimed at a younger audience, I can see somebody formulating it, writing it with the intention of emulating standard styles that were given to young boys to read. I can see that. But at the same time, it sits very, very oddly with the drama and the grandiosity that you get with the dwarves and their mission, with the sort of person that Gandalf is, with the sort of person that all of these various characters are, that there's a lot of things here. You know, here of old was Thrain, king under the mountain, and you have, you know, here was Girion, Lord and Dale, and I'm reading off of the map at the front of the book, and yet at the same time, you have this way of speaking that feels very much of that, as I said, it feels very schoolboy. And it's an interesting dichotomy, an interesting juxtaposition of these two styles of writing. That on the one hand you have drama and poetry, and on the other hand this schoolboy writing. And I think that it is potentially part of its charm, but it sits very, very oddly for me. And it may be that I didn't read it young enough, and also it may be that I've spent enough time reading later high fantasy aimed at adults that it doesn't quite feel right. But this is where it all begins. That and Lord of the Rings, which I have not read, but I presume Lord of the Rings is slightly less schoolboy, although, as I said, I haven't read it yet, so I can report back to you on my opinion on that when I get to them. I'm having a lot of pauses in here because it's a book that I'm not feeling deeply enthused about. It was fine, wasn't a hard read, but it also wasn't something that I couldn't put down. You know, there are books that you pick them up and you just want to keep reading them. This really wasn't one of them, and you know, I can't even really put my finger on why. The story is interesting, the incident is interesting, the world building is, of course, delightful, because that is one of Tolkien's great strengths, is world building, or so everyone says. Certainly my father says that the Silmarillion and the other books, which are basically just the world building and legend rather than the storytelling, in his opinion, are best. I wouldn't know, I haven't read them. But this is an interesting little book just in how it sits in and of itself. So I'm not sure I have a lot to say about this. I don't feel like I would have really been missing anything if I hadn't read it, but, I really should have. So that's my latest installment in books I should have read, coming up a little bit shorter than usual, but I'm not sure I have all that much to say. It just doesn't particularly leap out at me. So I guess that's everything, and I will see you all next week.